test. What?
Oh, hello. You're
These
loud.
sound so terrible.
I don't know what to tell you.
It sounds like it sounds like I'm coming over the PA at a club, but I'm in the next room over. Like,
I don't
it's so
understand the
muffled.
problem with that. Are you don't like
I don't like. I should be hearing my voice in my own head, like the way that it normally sounds.
Yeah.
And
I got news for you. This is how your voice sounds to me. Like I'm in a club and I'm hearing you make an announcement from the next room over. You know, it's actually the perfect description of the timbre of your voice.
well, see, I think that's just because you always just slam the door in my face when I start talking.
So every time you talk to me, you are literally talking to me from the next room over.
Exactly. Yeah. We'll see how long I can survive like this.
Welcome to the Life Plus God podcast. My name is Alyssa Robinson, and I am here with one of my co-hosts, Aaron Willis.
'Tis me.
Yes, welcome back, our favorite co-host.
Favorite?
Yes.
Oh, no.
Yes,
That's not good.
you're one of us. You're one of the people.
That's nice. It
You don't
feels
have
nice
that.
to belong.
Yeah, you don't have that reverend in front of your name.
I do not.
If anything, it is irreverent. Aaron Willis.
I am the antithesis thereof. No, not at all. Yeah, I don't think I've been certified for anything in my life, frankly. So I'm just keeping that going,
Yeah.
keeping the trend.
In honor of that, let's talk about something we have absolutely no authority to talk about.
Again? Why are we here?
Yeah. So this month or a couple of months, because we're in the middle of Lent, as many of you know, we podcast out of Trietsch Memorial United Methodist Church in Flower Mound, Texas. And in Lent, we have this theme called restoration. And it is not the home improvement kind of restoration, love it or list it sort of thing. I love all the HGTV shows. I do. But it is about spiritual, emotional, mental restoration, which is a much bigger conversation and something that Aaron and I are trying to figure out what it means.
Yeah, I think, I'm just trying to figure out what it means in the context of like maybe a global sense of restoration, and then what it means like more internally to me as a sense of restoration. And I know that second one, but the first one, it's like, wow, that's a big concept.
Yeah. So, well, let's go ahead and jump right in because you kind of started leaning into my first question a little bit.
Okay.
When you hear the word restoration, what comes to mind?
You emailing me about this episode of the podcast.
And saying, oh no.
Oh no. What is the subject? No, so restoration, from the Latin to restore.
Are
no,
you
I'm just
serious?
Kidding.
Oh my gosh. I was about to lose it.
No. Not at all.
You got me.
Yeah, so obviously, the concept of restoring something, there can be so many layers to that, including, like, I just got from my mom and my stepdad's house, I got my sled from when I was a little kid that was actually my dad's sled from when he was a little kid. And it's really interesting because it's been so banged up, over the years. And it's like when I got it, it was covered in, cobwebs and, grass from the lawn, the leaf blower and all that kind of stuff. And so it's functional.
Mm-hmm.
It works. The little steering piece still turns the skids and everything like that. Or skates. I don't know exactly what those are called down there because I'm from the South. I don't know all the sled terminology. So looking at that sled, there is, I could talk about, there are some parts that are a little bit loose, but it's still really functional. I could talk about like maybe restoring the functionality, but leaving the way that it looks because it's all worn down. The red paint on all the metal parts is kind of patinaed and or coming off. and then it had, graphics silk screened on it, and those are all kind of worn into the wood. So now the grain of the wood is visible. And so you look at it and it's kind of like, oh, well, sure, I could sand this down and I could repaint the skids and stain or varnish the wood and do all that stuff. But that would only be restoring it cosmetically. But it also works. So like thinking of restoration, you said emotionally, spiritually, physically, kind of manifesting those different kind of contexts for it. All of that pops into my head when we start talking about restoration. And then the question is, how do we talk about that on a podcast?
I was hoping you'd know.
No, not at all. I Googled it like 15 minutes before we started and it was no help.
So I really like the sled comparison to restoration because I am very much in my home. I am very much a minimalist. Like, I don't own a lot of things. I don't have a ton of clothes. Spring cleaning is my favorite time because I love throwing things out. Like, I love purging myself of stuff. But there are a few pieces of furniture that have deep sentimental value to me because it was my great-grandmother's, or it was the desk that my grandmother learned to read and write on, or something that was passed down to me. And I think a lot about, it's come up time and time again. I've owned these things for years and like, oh, maybe I should restore them, because I'll say like the desk that I have was painted, olive green years ago because people did that in the 60s. And,
yes.
And so there's all these little things, but for me, it's part of the story. And so when I think of restoration, it's working on something, working on yourself, if we're looking at it in the spiritual sense, but also like bringing all of the history with it, bringing all of the sentimental value with it, and not losing what got you to that point. And so what I don't think restoration is, maybe that's the easier way to talk about it. What I don't think when we're talking about spiritual restoration is exactly what you said of like God is taking that sled, sanding it down, restaining it, repainting it, covering up all of the flaws so it looks like a brand new sled that was built in the year 2022. Like, that doesn't feel like restoration to me, because it feels like you're doing a disservice to the history and the love and the wear and tear that's gone into that piece. And so I feel the same way about humanity, of like, restoration doesn't mean taking me back to who I was before. It means loving and accepting all of me for who I am now, all of my thoughts, but trusting and leaning into what God has in store for my future. But I still don't know if that's a complete answer. Like, I'm not sure.
Well, so there's this... To stay in the concept of restoration detached from application, let's just say, there's a great kind of, I don't know if it's a thought experiment or whatever, called the Ship of Theseus. Do you know, have you heard of this? I really love it because it's one of those things that I don't know that it speaks particularly to restoration, but you were talking about not losing what we have been or accomplished up until this point, but how do we continue? So that the idea of the Ship of Theseus is you have this ship of is he Persian? I don't remember his origin, or Greek, please forgive me. But there's his battleship that he used, and it's parked in the harbor now, docked there, and over the years it sits there not getting used. So the ship makers go in and they replace a board, for instance, because it's rotting, or it had a hole blown in it by a cannon or whatever, and so you go through and you replace this one board, and you replace the nails that hold that board in, and then you go and replace another board. And then maybe because you've hammered all these nails in, one of the ribs of the bow needs to be replaced. And bit by bit by bit, over many, many years, you begin to replace every bit of the ship of Theseus. In the end...
And so the question is it still the ship of Theseus?
Now, here's the great thing. The thought experiment takes that one step further, okay? Let's say that you saved all of the original pieces because you didn't want to destroy them or get rid of them. And the restored ship of Theseus is sitting in the harbor, and you take all of the original components. Now they've dried out. They've been in dry dock for years. You've been able to take a look at them, and you use all those original components, all the nails, all the rivets and rings and sails and everything, and you put it back together. Which one is the ship of Theseus?
Ooh. But I think that the point that it's making maybe is that it's not about the physical attributes and the hardware. It's about the sentimental value that we assign to things.
Maybe so. And is there a point where the ship that's in the harbor ceases to be the ship of Theseus because you've removed so many of the original parts, especially if you could rebuild the ship with the original parts because you've completely replaced everything? It's just an interesting thought experience.
Well, lucky for you, Theseus is called in today. Theseus, what do you have to say?
First time caller, long time listener. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know why he's from Brooklyn.
Yeah, he did not sound like a Greek or Persian.
I got this ship. Look, it's just been a pain in my backside forever.
Stop asking me about it.
I replaced so many pots. Go down to Home Depot twice a day.
No, I think that that's interesting. I think that that is an interesting idea. And it makes you think about restoration differently. And I know like it makes it easier for us to wrap our minds around it when we're comparing it to furniture or things like a ship or whatever, because we understand physical objects and we don't understand spiritual restoration at all. At least I don't. I can't speak for everybody. Maybe somebody does 100% understand spiritual restoration.
Yeah. And I can verify that she doesn't understand because I basically asked her to explain it to me in her email, and she's like, here's just a bunch of questions I'm going to go over.
Yeah. I was like, that's what I'm asking you. So, okay, let me talk about restoration from a biblical perspective for a little bit.
Yes.
Okay? Because this is what I tried to explain to you, and I did a horrible job of because I don't understand it.
Okay.
So I found this on a website. Yay. So go internet.
Yes.
So this is just a blogger's interpretation of restoration from the Bible. But it says, in the Bible, restoration is always in abundance. When something is restored, it is always better than it was to begin with. God's promise to us is a better way, a better life, a better future for ourselves and our loved ones. So maybe in the biblical definition, the new ship is Theseus's ship because it's better than it was before.
Yeah.
With new technology and better quality workmanship and products and I don't know how to build a ship. Better.
Yeah. Indoor plumbing.
Got
this
better
time.
glue.
Yeah. 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 I don't know if they glued it together, but you never know.
But this idea that restoration from God is abundance. And so I was thinking about that and thinking about some moments in my life that I have felt restored. And I feel like you can only feel restored when you're looking back. Like in the midst of something, when you're going through that trial or trying time or trauma, whatever,
right.
The 3 T's.
Right.
When you're going through that, you can't, unless you're a very special kind of person, like a Buddhist monk or something, you can't see the restoration happening because you're just so overcome by the grief of what you're experiencing. And for something to be restored, it has to be broken to some extent or worn down or weathered. We don't really talk about restoring a brand new couch that you just bought.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, it's like, say that you have like any kind of a medical need or a medical condition that would require surgery.
Mm-hmm.
You have, maybe this thing inside you, maybe it's like a piece of bone or cartilage that's come unset or, anything like that. They're going to have to cut into you, which in and of itself is an injury. And so that's obviously, the medical community has worked for decades, centuries, millennia, however long, to create the most minimally invasive way to do that. But even in that sense, under all of that watchful eye, there has to be additional injury, so sometimes to the point where you have to go through months of physical therapy to fix something that was, ostensibly fine before, or maybe it was never okay. And so, yeah, I think that it would, when you say that, it just makes me think of like, oh, I'll forego the anesthesia. Just, stab it right here and do what you need to do. And
it's fine.
Don't worry about it.
I've got a high pain tolerance.
Yeah. Yep.
I don't know if I like that analogy as much as the ship one because.
Okay. Can you just wind the tape back, please?
No, because when I think of or maybe I don't like it because it makes me sad, but like restoration, I feel like it should be somewhat better than it was before. And like in terms of surgery and injury, you might never be anywhere near what you were before.
You might never be, or it might be better than it ever was.
I guess.
We have a friend, and she had very strangely at a young age gotten hip dysplasia, and maybe it's not better than it ever was, but she had her entire hip joint replaced, in her 40s, which is very early. And it's better than she can remember it ever. Yeah. And so, from that standpoint, maybe I was a little, maybe there aren't as many positive. Maybe there wasn't as many positive medical outcomes as I was imagining. But anyway, I can cherry pick some.
Yeah, fine. This is going well. No.
Can we just wind that back? We'll start over.
Yeah, here's the thing. Aaron is pointing to the back of the room like he's directing somebody to do something.
Is there not somebody?
There is nobody back there.
Oh, my.
It is the two of us sitting at this table. Nobody's running the show here.
Forgive me.
No one is steering the ship.
Yes.
Theseus's ship.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Oh, never mind.
It's okay. Apology accepted. So when I think of personal stories of restoration in my life, I started to bring this up before the podcast, and Aaron was like, shouldn't we be rolling?
I was like, shut it down.
Save it for the podcast.
I don't want to hear this mess.
Yeah. I don't want to hear your story I started opening up about like my divorce and how I felt restored, and it was like such a tough time and blah, blah, blah.
Gosh.
And he was like, why are you telling me this?
I know. It was like 7 or 8 seconds. I'm like, okay, I get it.
Like, shouldn't you be recording this right now?
Yes, I was like, we need to save it for the podcast.
No, but my divorce, which I've very openly talked about, probably y'all are tired of hearing about it, but it is the most defining moment in my life, and I have the microphone, so I'm going to continue to talk about it.
There you go.
So when I was going through my divorce, there was no restoration in sight for me. I felt like a victim. I felt like I couldn't see my future. I didn't know. I felt like a nomad. I didn't have a place to stay. I was living with my parents. Like it just felt like everything was falling apart around me, and I didn't know who I was without being Mrs. Fill in the blank. I'm very careful about not mentioning names.
Oh, that's not That's not your former last name?
No,
I was gonna say
that's
that's
not.
very unique.
Alyssa, fill in the blank. But looking back on the experience and seeing the way that my life is now, I'm happier than I've ever been. I feel more independent and centered in who I am than I've ever felt before. And I can see how God restored me through that process. And I don't look the same as I did before I got married at the age of 27, or 28, however old I was before I got married. I don't look the same. I would not have imagined that my life would look anything like this if you had asked me 5 years ago what my future looked like. But that's why I was kind of emphasizing like taking the history and sentiment with you, because I can honestly say I wouldn't change a single thing about my life up until this point, because it's made me who I am, and I really like who I am. And I think that's also part of the restoration, is realizing like I'm not perfect. I haven't figured it all out, and I've got my own metaphorical scars that I'm carrying with me. And but I do think that abundance has come out of this. I feel more spiritually connected, more in tune with myself than I ever have in my life, which might be weird for our listeners to hear, because I'm very much at a point in my faith of deconstruction. But that's also a big part of my spirituality and my spiritual journey, is doing that deconstruction work and figuring out, what do I really believe? And I think that that's part of the restoration process as well. That is just constantly moving and working. I don't know. So that's what I was thinking of when I think restoration, of like, okay, I can see an example in my life of restoration that has happened and continues because of one moment of he walked out the door.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a
lot of different moments.
It was a lot of moments.
Yeah. That was the biggest one, I think.
Yeah.
What about you? Do you have any personal stories of restoration that you...
Yes. I mean, I think for me, it's probably been over the last three years, they've been pretty difficult. And I've dealt a lot with depression, even thoughts of self-harm and stuff like that, which I didn't really even identify that that's what it was at first. Partially because I do deal with a lot of just intrusive thoughts naturally. So my brain is just always like, it's like, I need to finish this spreadsheet. And then 3 seconds later, it's like, what would a squirrel on a unicycle look like if it was juggling?
And you're like, that was a weird one. And then the next one comes
right.
in.
And so, just trigger warning, or if you are, a little bit nervous, that, I would just be there and I mean like, oh man, I'm sad. I don't really know what to do. Maybe I shouldn't exist. And then something else pops up and it just, it keeps going. And then, you start working through that kind of stuff and they're like, yeah, that's probably not a normal. It's like, oh, okay. Well, I have tons of not normal thoughts. So maybe.
I had thoughts like that when I was going through the divorce, and it's not as intense as saying you're suicidal.
Right. Yeah.
But I did have those times when I was driving home that I was like, if I just got into a car accident and everything ended, that'd be okay. Yeah, I know.
And that's kind of hard to even reconcile on its own. And so, for me, going through, and I've been through therapy before in my life, a few times. And some of it's been more occupational style therapy or behavioral therapy to try to fix some of the habitual things or lack of habitual things with ADHD, some of the normal things. But this is just, in the last 2 years, it's just been like your brain broke.
Yeah.
And how do you get back to, or in this case, better than the way you were before? And one of the interesting things is to actually bring this to a point of restoration, because I know it sounds kind of dark, but
well, I think restoration is dark. It's dark work.
It definitely can
Not
be.
Not furniture restoration, but soul restoration.
Well, if you go with like a walnut stain, that's pretty dark.
Ebony is.
Yeah, very dark. Yeah, definitely. If you're not into that, you want to stay more to the oak and maple side.
The lighter side
for
of
sure.
restoration.
Maybe cherry wood is as far as you're going to go, and that's okay.
No, it's okay to go dark.
Well, to bring it back to more of where I am now, one of the amazing things about the restoration part of this process for me is understanding that there were so many attributes that I had thrown upon, either being a creative free spirit or being ADHD, that this is just part of my personality. And then when I start working through it, it's like, no, this is just hardcore ingrained anxiety that you've had since you were a tiny kid.
And it's just learned to work around or cope with.
Oh, yeah. And just being like, oh, okay, wait a second. And now, like, being able to identify that and just be like, hey, you know what? Me missing this thing really materially doesn't make any difference in my life. And me wanting to please people and never saying no is causing me anxiety. And then that anxiety coupled with maybe missing deadlines, maybe coupled with guilt on that, coupled with me not communicating with them because I have all this shame is worse than if I had just said, I can't do that for you. I can't help you with that thing. It's really difficult to kind of go through and unlearn that natural response that I've built up over 4 decades of my life.
So you think that so is therapy what's helping you uncover all of that?
Therapy is a big part. There's been a lot of actually independent learning. The amazing thing is we know so much more about any of these kind of spectrum disorders than any of the neurotypical or non-neurotypical spectrum, which is ADHD, bipolar, autism, Asperger's, and then the comorbidities with those, with anxiety and everything like that. And I'm not trying to turn this podcast into that specifically, but it's been therapy, it's been medication, it's been independent research. It's been a lot of me just asking myself, like, when I do have an internally negative response, why?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it too has been going through the deconstruction process as well, and kind of relearning that maybe the image of God that I had was a little bit more overbearing than it really is supposed to be. And some of that might be, this is no shade to anybody, but some of that might be growing up Baptist. Some of that just might be my own personal interpretation and dealing with rejection sensitivity and things like that. That just literally might be how I interpreted the image of God in my life and how I interacted with that. But and I've had friends and family praying for me and walking me through so many things, and so it's been a big group effort. And so it's not just those things, but I can say with at least with therapy, because I am and have always been completely flummoxed by the negative viewpoint of being in therapy. It's like therapy is a great tool. It doesn't mean that you're crazy. It means that, like, you literally might be too close to something to see how to fix it. Yeah. So, but I think the thing with therapy and attacking this specifically, because it had gotten so bad, has given me things to work on pragmatically. And I've had a lot of, you should pray on this, or I'll pray for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't devalue that at all. I really, really don't. I can say though that, it's almost given me some tangible things that it's like, okay, what if I now just immediately identify this behavior and do something different?
Mm-hmm.
And that's been incredibly helpful as well as all the other stuff.
Well, and as you were sharing all of this, the thought occurred to me when we're trying to, and you bringing up the image of God and connecting into this spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
I think that when the reason that restoration is such a difficult topic for us to wrap our head around is because the easy marketing Christianity that we've been raised in tells us just wait, and everything will work out. Just sit and be present with God and everything will work out. Have hope, send prayers up and blessings come down and all of that stuff, which, we did, Doug and I did a whole separate episode on prayer and our thoughts on that. But I think that what really stood out to me is all of the hard work that you've been putting in. And it's not just one thing. I was like, well, is it therapy that's doing it? You're like, well, yeah, that and medication and
I didn't mean it like that.
And talking to people
Yeah.
and recognizing when my behavior is not healthy and all of this work that you've had to do. And it makes me think about, so what we're doing right now as we're walking through Lent is we are literally week by week walking through the Passion of the Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And this past week, we started with the Last Supper, and then we're going and that's the starting point. And so for 6 weeks up until Easter, we are going through the last 24 hours of Jesus's life. And I doubt that Jesus's mind was like, just wait.
Yeah.
And this will pass. And no, he had to be an active participant in the most torturous and horrible experience that any of us can imagine.
Yeah.
And there was no opportunity to just say, okay, I'm going to wait for this to be over and get to the good part.
Right.
Because the really hard truth is that it doesn't just go away. Your mental health doesn't just miraculously improve if you wait long enough.
Right.
Going through my divorce, it wasn't just like, okay. And in the beginning, I tried to do that. I was like, okay, just wait it out. He'll come back.
Yeah.
He'll, all of these things. And then I realized, oh man, I have to work on myself. And that's when I started doing therapy and I started doing research and I started looking into how am I going to support myself and what does my future look like? And, all of these things. It was a lot of really hard work to get through it. And it wasn't just sitting and waiting of okay, when will this be over?
Yeah. And I think, there are a lot of times that's just human nature.
Mm-hmm.
When I started, I think the thing that started with me was kind of just the imposter syndrome of where I was at that time in my life and having that kind of slowly creep in. Just being like, okay, well, once this phase of my job experience changes, it'll be fine. And then it changes, but not in the way that you hope. And then there's just this, you don't really feel it because, when you started going downhill, it was just a little bit. There was just a little bit of speed and a little bit of a grade, but the more exponential that fall off is, you don't necessarily realize it until you're already going way too fast.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's the frog on the skillet concept. If you drop him on there, he'll hop off, but if you turn it on. And also, who figured that out?
The people who boil frogs.
Yeah.
Frog legs is yummy. I mean, frog legs are delicious, and somebody's got to cook them.
Okay.
And they got to figure out how to cook those frogs.
I was really into the Muppets when I was a little kid, so
I'm sorry.
and also now. So
does it help that Kermit looks nothing like any frog I've ever seen?
I don't accept your slander.
Okay.
And no, it's fine. It's fine. He's not real. I keep telling myself.
No, but that actually makes me think of, I love documentaries. I watch all of them, especially the murder ones, but this one's not a murder one. I watched a National Geographic documentary on Pompeii and the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. And we think of that in history as like massive explosion, lava everywhere, instant death for everybody in the city. Like that's how I always thought of it.
Yeah.
And then I watched this documentary and I learned, no, this was a full week-long process. Mm-hmm. The volcano exploded and people were like, oh, look at that. Some people, and then ash started to come down the mountain and ash filled the air. And some people, when the ash started coming in and they started having trouble breathing, they were like, uh-oh, we should leave. But it was a very small number of people who actually left. And everyone else, like you said, it's human nature to just stay where you are, stay where you're safe and comfortable, and wait until the absolute last minute of like, oh, now I have to leave. Well, by the time people decided now it's time for me to go, there was so much ash and soot in the air, they couldn't see.
Yeah.
And then it was just like a slow, painful death for people just being swallowed by volcanic ash and lava that took like somewhere between 5 and 7 days to actually reach the city of Pompeii from Mount Vesuvius. And so like, that just blew my mind. And how often do we do that figuratively and, literally when we think of like natural disasters of you're being told to evacuate and so many people are like, nah, I think I'm good. Like I'll wait it out.
Yeah.
Because that's where we feel comfortable and safe.
My dad used to live in Florida. They have hurricanes down there a ton. Mm-hmm. And there are people who are just like, well, I got everything I need. Yeah. So I'm just going to hunker down here. And sometimes
it works.
That's a great strategy. Yeah. And then sometimes you have a lot more work to do if you wait that long and then you have a problem. So
yeah. Well, so the point that I was trying to make with that is that we can't just sit and wait for restoration to happen on it. It's almost like we can't passively expect restoration to happen to us. We have to be a part of it. And
I do want to add to that because I do agree with what you're saying. Mm-hmm. This is not an either or. This is an and situation. But
I wish you would disagree with me because I love a good debate.
Okay, well, I'll disagree with you on something else. There is somebody sitting over there. There. Just because it's fresh on my mind, there. That really depends on how you define it. I think that there are a lot of people out there that are in their situation that they're like, I understand. I have no idea where to go or what to do or how to start.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it does seem a little bit overwhelming when somebody says you can't just sit there and wait for it to happen.
I definitely don't want to be endorsing the pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality.
Right.
Like that's not what I'm saying.
There's no bootstraps. But the only thing that I can say is ever your responsibility is to acknowledge at some point that you need help.
Yeah.
If you can do that, then that's your first step.
Yeah.
And then there's somebody or something that can help you. And that can be God, that can be your spouse, your next door neighbor, your mom, your dad, your best friend, a beloved pet, a houseplant. I don't know what it is, but there's, as long as you can say, hey, I think this is enough. I think I need to figure out something else. You don't necessarily have to figure that out, what that next thing is. Just figure out that first thing that you know that you need some kind of assistance.
So now that we're experts in restoration.
Done. Where's my certificate?
Yeah, I'll print it for you. Where would you like to see restoration in the world, in the church, in your personal life? Like, where are you hoping to see some restoration happen?
That's a really good question, to which I have many more answers than I think.
It's an unfair question.
We could take time. Obviously right now the people of Ukraine are absolutely on my heart. I think that's an absolutely terrible situation. I'm going to get up tomorrow morning and walk with a close friend of mine at like 5 a.m, and it's going to be 30 degrees. It's going to be incredibly cold, and I don't want to get up and do it, and I'm going to do it. And anytime I do that and it's bitter cold outside, I always think of the homeless population in this area, because I get to put on my thermals and then my sweats and then my nice comfy jacket.
And you know it's temporary. You have somewhere to go.
I'm only going to be out there for an hour walking around, chatting with a friend, and then I'm going to go home and get warm and eat food and go about my day. And so, there's so many places. And again, this, a part of this filters into me being an anxious person. Being anxious and empathetic is a lot to kind of balance.
That's too much.
It's not too much, but it's
best is not being anxious or empathetic.
You could do that too. Yeah, that's I strive for that some days. There are many times where I've got to be like, hey, that's not my problem. But then I immediately acknowledge it's somebody else's problem, and why do they have that problem and I don't have that problem? And
oh my gosh. So there is a word that I don't know. That I can't think. It's an actual word. I have no idea what it is, but the definition of the word is the feeling of wanting to care less. And I feel that all the time of like, I see brokenness in the world around me, and so many people being hurt, and whether it's for their sexual and gender identity, whether their country is literally being attacked and they're displaced, whether they feel like the system has failed them. There's so many ways in which we are broken, and even in just being able to have conversations with each other when we disagree, we're broken. And I see things like this happening constantly, and that I know that it's outside of my control, and there's nothing that I as an individual necessarily can do to fix those things. But I care so deeply about them that I'm just kind of at a point of like, okay, what do I do with all these feelings of like caring for others and feeling helpless and incapable of changing anything?
Yeah. I remember the word for that. It's Prozac.
No. I should just go to the doctor and be like, yes, I'd really like to care less. I've heard that you have medication for that.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
They definitely do. Yeah. No,
I wouldn't call it well, maybe it is a form of anxiety. But it's like desperately wanting restoration in the world. And I think that that's part of like where the spiritual meets the physical, of like trusting that God is the God of restoration, and it's just not happening the way that I want it to happen or as quickly as I want it to happen. But that's a lot of hope and trust to put into
it is.
God.
It is. Yeah. It's a lot of hope and trust to put into anything. It's difficult. It to me, and you guys might be different. I have grown up with the concept of giving things to God. You just need to give it to God. You need to give it to God. And I'll be honest, even at 43, I don't know what that looks like.
Me either. I mean, I'm only 33, so.
Wow.
You.
So ageist.
So you've had a little bit more time to figure it out. I don't know why you haven't really.
Yeah.
Clicked in there.
Because it's to me it's one of those it's one of those things. I don't know. This might be my personality, and you guys, again, comment, do whatever, and let me know, like, if you've experienced like a breakthrough in actually giving it to God. But when I talk to people about it, it's just like, well, you just pray about it, and then you let it go, and you give it to God, and it's like, okay, step one, pray about it. That totally makes 100% sense, and then
you can just like take it and like put it. You can, I don't know. Like,
yeah.
Because you can feel that weight in your chest. I feel it right now. Like just bringing up all of the brokenness I see in the world.
Right.
I feel this weight in my chest.
And so they're like, well, if you feel that, then you didn't give it to God. And it's like, no, that's fine. And it's like, well, then you don't fully trust. And it's like, I don't know that that's fair either, because like I'm 43. I've had no plan this entire time, you guys. None. That's not what I do. I'm not a planner.
Yeah. That's why you married a planner.
Everybody in my life will vouch for me on that point. Literally every human that has met me for more than 45 minutes will vouch for me on that point.
But that's what I like about you. I text you and I'm like, hey, want to do a podcast? You're like, no, right.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
Don't
whatever.
even look at your calendar because you don't have one.
My wife has one, and she's like, did you put that on the calendar? And I'm like, no. I did put some stuff on the calendar this week, so I'm trying. But so the concept of like giving something over to God, it kind of feels difficult for me to equate that to trust. There are people in my life that I trust to watch my child that I won't let wind cables because they do it wrong. I don't, and say what you will. Even my wife and I would both be honest enough with each other to say, I don't trust you with everything. My wife has a huge long list of stuff that she can't trust me with because I'm crazy forgetful, and that's okay. And then there are things that I wouldn't trust her with, and that's just kind of the division of human interaction, where it's like, oh, well, I'll take care of that. Just let me take care of that because I know that that's hard for you. Let me do that for you. You do this for me because I'm really bad at it, and all that kind of good stuff. So I guess it's hard for me. I have an incredible imagination, but it's also very difficult for me to then not take that thing that I'm supposed to entrust to God and just put it in a little glass box and put it up on the shelf. Yeah. I can't touch the thing anymore. It's in that glass box.
Yeah. Well,
it's not gone. It's not there.
I want to talk about Jesus for a second.
Do it.
Which is like, I don't always say that. So it's
the first time you've said it on this podcast.
I want to talk about Jesus.
Let's do it.
So first of all, starting with the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus is praying basically and saying, God, please don't make me do this. Like, please, what he says is, please take this cup from me. But if this is your will, so be it. Now, what I really wish, that's all we know. And then it starts going into all of the events of the crucifixion and the arrest and the, trial and the torture, and then all eventually leading up to this crucifixion. What I really wish is that we got insight into the inner monologue of Jesus during that time. Because because I grew up with the mentality, and I was also told constantly, just give it up to God. Give it up to God. And a lot of people would argue that prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane was Jesus giving it up to God, saying, I don't want to do this, but if you want me to do this, then so be it. But I don't
absolutely see that.
Yeah, but the way that I interpret their feelings on that is, when you give it up to God, you don't have to feel it anymore.
Yeah.
And I disagree with that entirely. And I wish that we could know all of the emotions that Jesus was feeling during that time of like, I can't imagine that he was like, okay, so be it. And then he just detached himself from his feelings until he was hanging on the cross.
Yeah.
Like that can't be true. And so I don't think that giving it up to God means putting it in the little glass box and not interacting with it, not caring about it, not having feelings about it anymore.
I can't not care about it. I just see it up there all the time.
Yeah.
And it just, it eats away with me until the situation changes.
All that to say is I also don't know what giving it up to God means. Because I don't know if we have an example of that.
That's my thing. I've never in my life had it explained in a way that it's made sense to me. And I've heard that phrase used in ways that make me terribly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like after a good friend's sexual assault. After another couple that I knew just barely lost a child.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, they can't right now. Like literally
ever.
Maybe not ever.
Ever.
Like the confines of of human emotion, I don't think allow you, because if you do, just instantly, that's almost like a fugue state or whatever it's called, where you're just like, I don't acknowledge that this happens to me at all. Like it's a defense mechanism of your brain. And so, I agree. I have not seen a perfect example of that. And when I've seen people who are like, well, I just gave it to God and then they walked away, I've tried to do that, and maybe it's my personality, but I cannot do that.
I just don't feel like when someone says that, I don't think we're hearing the whole story, because I'm sure there is a lot more pain and suffering that came with that than I just can't imagine somebody would just be able to be like, yep, gave it up to God and moved on. I was like, well, now you're talking to us about it in hindsight. And so it's a little bit easier to like see the, Pollyanna side of the story when you've already made it through.
Yeah.
But no, so back to restoration, all of those feelings and emotions, that's how I see restoration, is like you're gathering all of that up and you're bringing it with you to whatever's next. And maybe there's something about like sharing it with God, or like letting God
that makes sense.
Share the load, the burden with you. That does make more sense to me.
Well, it's like
knowing that you're not alone.
Like in my life, like, and maybe this is what people mean. Maybe I do know how to do it, and just the terminology has never made sense, or the fact that it's not an instantaneous thing for me.
Yeah.
But, for me, it's been just like I said back with the mental health stuff. It's when I have taken things to God and I kind of examine them through prayer with him and look at them. Going back to the sled, if I were to pull it apart, it's not just like screws and wood and metal. Like there's like rivets that I've never riveted metal before. And so, I wouldn't trust myself to go through and do that on my own. But if I had, my dad or my stepdad there who have worked on things a little bit more.
And they also have an emotional attachment to this particular item, so you'll know they'll handle with care and respect.
Well, yes, that's true as well. Maybe if I was sitting down with them and going through it, when we pull this rivet, like, how do we get it back together? And they'll be like, oh, well, that's a 1/4-inch snap rivet, and you're just going to need this tool. And it's like, oh, well, that was okay.
That whole phrase was meaningless to me, but
no,
I trust you.
I don't know that that's a real thing. I was just, I've still never riveted, because I don't do that.
Well, you are riveting, so.
That is also not true. But thank you. But so maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's just that careful consideration, but it's never been like this, I just say, I give it to you, Lord, and then butterflies fly out of my mouth and everything's great and the sun starts shining.
Ay, mariposa. I love Encanto.
Encanto is great.
And I'm just like seeing this butterfly explosion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But that's kind of what I like about what we're doing during Lent at this church with restoration is, and I know it's a very traditionalist, like Stations of the Cross sort of thing of like walking through all of but I don't think that, at least since I've been working here and any church that I've been a part of, I don't know if I've ever spent the full 6 weeks of Lent on Jesus's final days.
Yeah.
Like normally you wait until Holy Week to do all of that work.
It's a little uncomfortable.
It is. It's
I think that's
extremely
why.
uncomfortable. And I think that that's the importance of restoration is like get comfortable with the discomfort.
Right. It's kind of like restoration is uncomfortable.
It is.
Yeah. It's not comfortable for the sled when you pull it all apart.
No.
No.
And sometimes maybe at some point you'll pull it all apart and then you have instant regret of like, oh, I'm never going to be able to get this back together.
I've done that before as well.
It's easier to take things apart than it is to put them back together.
It is. That goes for relationships too. I've absolutely been in a situation where that's it. You know, you pull the thread and the whole thing unravels and it didn't go the way that you thought that it was going to go.
Yeah. And so we're taking a full 6 weeks to pull this thing apart piece by piece by piece to where we actually have to sit in the discomfort of what Jesus had to experience. And it's not just a flash in the pan of like Palm Sunday, Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, Easter, which a lot of people don't even go to those services. They just show up for Easter, which if that's what you're going to come to, that's what you're going to come to. But
Sure.
There are a lot of people who go to church on Sundays but wouldn't have gone to a Holy Week service. And now we're sitting in the full trauma of Jesus's final days. And but restoration is hopeful. You know, I know it's sounding like really sad right now, but like we have to sit in this dark time to get to the hope.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that maybe there's a point where, you know, the expectation, the hope of it, the expectation of things to be restored or alleviated or lightened, whatever that is in your particular situation, you know, I'm sure that it does feel dark. And I know that it does feel dark to go through the Stations of the Cross in that way. But also, I'm talking more out of my newfound kind of untying my anxiety with that. There's a lot of guilt and shame that I've had with that in the past. And now what I'm trying to do in untying that is realizing that my guilt and shame in that, maybe that darkness in that, in my personal mind, this is just me, I'm not putting this on anybody else, it maybe devalued the gift that it was because I'm making it more about how I feel.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to invalidate the way I feel, but there are also unhealthy feelings that you can have, or just non-constructive feelings. Maybe they are destructive, maybe they're benign, but like that is such a gift. And I think...
Well, and there's a difference between darkness and a black hole.
Oh, yeah.
Shame is a black hole.
Yeah.
That it is, it's hard to build on it.
Yeah.
It just destroys everything.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. But I think like if we had, if we were to take somebody that lost their life in the course of protecting somebody else, we would be sad that they were gone, but there would be this sense of what a heroic thing, what a selfless act that was. And we would elevate them, put them on a pedestal, unfortunately, sometimes deify them, because that is how we should maybe look at the restoration of Jesus's actions on the cross, is that brought us there And for me, maybe it shouldn't be about that exists to shine a light on how unworthy you are.
Mm-hmm.
Because if somebody jumps in front of the gun for you, you're clearly not unworthy.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be like, oh, no, I'm not going to jump in front. I'm not going to take a bullet for that guy, kind of a thing. Maybe instead of you feeling guilt or shame or bad or anxious or whatever that is about that, maybe you feel treasured or worthy or...
Isn't that interesting that, like, if you think of it, I really like the way that you put that. If you think of it that way of like, why would Jesus do it if you weren't worth it?
Exactly.
And for it to be, because I think that we do kind of turn Lent into like this event where we're just supposed to feel so bad and terrible and we're sinful and, you know, all of these things of like just dragging ourselves through the dirt. But yay, Jesus saved us, you know.
Yeah,
So
just tack that onto the
we're all
end.
cool now.
Make sure that,
But no, to think of that, like how much I am loved and how worthy I am for this to be done for me is, yeah, that sounds like restoration.
Did we figure it out?
I think we did. I think we
Oh my
solved
gosh.
restoration.
Can you run that back? Oh, there's still nobody over there. I'm so sorry.
No, and honestly, I think that's a good way to end it. So, and it makes me think of, you know, when you were talking about length of time that restoration takes. You may not know this. It just started this week, but once a week we're releasing in our blog post a story of restoration from one of our congregants, and they talk about like the darkness that they've gone through and how the light has come at the end. And for some people's stories, it was a limited point of time that they went through, and then they're on the other side of it, and maybe it was a 5-year span. For someone else, they shared a story of like it was a 25-year darkness that they were going through, of like there was an event that happened that takes them, 25 years. And then I have another story that's been shared where she is in the midst of it right now, and she sees God's restoration at work, but hasn't crossed the finish line.
Wow.
And she doesn't know if she ever will. She might not live to see the restoration and hope that she wants to see happen in her family. And there's just all of these beautiful stories. And so I say all that to say, I'd like to invite our listeners to go to tmumc.org/stories. If you want to read some of these additional stories of restoration, both from our congregants and our pastors are sharing some of their stories as well. But let's see our worth and our value and how loved we are in the restoration work that is constantly being done in each of us individually and in the world around us.